Um, we do have a fairly well-developed process that keeps us out of trouble. I think really the principal purpose of it is to keep us out of trouble. Keep us out of trouble with our members, keep us out of trouble with the public and otherwise. So it's a process that seems cumbersome. It's often, I tell people it's like, sometimes it's like molasses going uphill on a cold day. It takes a while to get there. But when we get there, we're firmly in that position, and there's generally a pretty broad consensus, and we're ready to move. One other thing I thought of to sort of give you a sense of the importance. Every year we have to file a tax return, with an informational return with the Internal Revenue Service, and tell them how much money there's no limits, but tell them how much money we spend in the various areas, and including affecting public policy. We tell them that we spend 12% of your assets, 12% of your resources on advocacy with the General Assembly, with the Congress, and before the courts. So this is an important piece of what you do, an important piece of what we do. So what are the triggering events? Well, legislation introduced. As Tim mentioned, somebody introduces a proposal that lawyers may view as not making any sense. It may have some underlying policy. It often the proposal can be worked out. I mean, if you go to the lawmaker, you find out what the underlying purpose is, it can be worked through, and people can come up with it. But a triggering event might be legislation is introduced. Another is a rule change proposed. Our court, Supreme Court, proposes about 6 or 7 times a year on average a change to the rules, or somebody proposes a change to the rules and the court asks for comments. And in virtually every case, the TBA, through the sections or committees, is making a comment trying to give the views of lawyers so the court has a consensus view on those questions. But the area that y'all are most interested in is a committee or section initiative. If you want to see the law changed in an area, and this last year, construction law came up with a couple of things that had been changed that needed to be clarified, came up with a bill, we proposed it, got it adopted. So that kind of initiative coming from your section is another triggering event in the process. And finally, there may be an officer or a board member or staff that refers a matter to you. It could be legislation, but it also could be a rule proposal. It could be, occasionally we ask you your view on something that's before the ABA. ABA House of Delegates is reviewing a matter, and so and asking for your views on that. So those are the triggering events. Whoops, there's one more. Oh, okay. ABA or some other entity proposes. So if the proposal is a matter of interest or concern to the profession, and that's the standard under the bylaws, if it's yes, then it goes, the recommendation needs to go to the House of Delegates for consideration. If it's not, then it goes directly to the Board of Governors. If it's not a matter of interest to the profession, it goes directly to the Board of Governors. So then can the House timely consider the matter? As I told you, the House meets quarterly. Often on these legislative developments, we don't know what's coming up early in the session, and late, and sort of that gap in there the legislature meets. We often don't have time for the House to anticipate all of these changes and to be ready to give a viewpoint. But we try to time the meetings of the House and try to anticipate for the House what may be coming, so that we can give them some warning on what issues there might be. But the next issue then is, can it be timely considered by the House? If it can, then it's considered for the House to make a recommendation. If not, then it can go directly to the Board of Governors. And believe it or not, there are issues that fall in that gap between two-week gap between the House meeting and the board meeting that require attention without the House. But it's just the way we have to act if we're going to be relevant to the process. And I think the folks in the House and the board all understand that. So can the Board of Governors timely consider the proposal? Sometimes the board meetings are not timed right either. Yeah, if yes, then the board adopts or rejects or modifies the recommendation of the House, or it goes directly to the Executive Committee. Executive Committee, those 6 officers that I told you about, 6 officials within the association, and the others meets monthly, generally on a Monday afternoon, late on a Monday afternoon, monthly on a regular schedule, when the board's not meeting, so that you have a monthly opportunity, and generally we can time something and make it work in that process. So if there's time for Executive Committee consideration, then it considers, adopts, rejects, or modifies the proposal. If there's not time for that, then the President decides. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. We have had to have situations like that. Generally, the President will ask, at least poll the Executive Committee, or be able to ask when today's electronic communications, be able to let the Executive Committee have some idea that something's coming up. But ultimately, the President does have the power to make that decision. So once the proposal is adopted, once the recommendation is adopted, the policy is adopted, how does it get implemented? So if it's a court rule, the President and the General Counsel, Executive Director, and generally you as the section or committee chair are on the recommendation to the court, or on the petition that goes back to the court, or on the comment that goes to the court. If we have any motions or other action to take, we try to do that in a sort of with the consensus among those 4 folks. So be aware that if your section develops something, you're probably going to be called on to be involved in that process, that piece of the process too. It's something we sort of handle from here, but we often ask you for the sort of first draft of what the comment is, and Bob's had to do that a time or two, and Frank as well. So, you know, it's something that while we don't have the subject matter expertise, we do have the sort of relationship and the understanding of how the court operates and what their policy is here. But there is no rule on rules. The court has nothing written down. We know what the custom is. Yeah. It's yeah, sort of. It may fall within the power to remonstrate with your government. If it's legislation, then it falls in my responsibility, along with our legislative counsel and Brenda Gadd, to try to get the legislation adopted. We do have a great group of folks, the Government Affairs Committee, generally made up of lawyer lobbyists. We met over 2 weeks during the session with them, and they give us a lot of advice. But we have great lawyers too, legislative counsel, in Steve Cobb and Giff Thornton, with Brad Lampley's help. And among the whole group of us, we're able to sort of cover most of the legislative needs that we have. What we are developing and what Josie's been working on the last 18 months? Close to 2 years. Okay. Close to 2 years. Josie's, y'all should know, is her spouse is getting transferred to Washington with the military, and so she's following him. We tried to get her to stay, but yeah. And what Brenda's working on is more of a grassroots operation. We think we've got the sort of professional side of stuff covered, but we want more lawyers to be more in touch with their lawmakers and to have some opportunity to have those conversations back in the district. And so we're trying to build more of a grassroots operation. You may have seen, anybody here seen TBA Impact? and you go to the front page of the website. They have. TBA Impact is actually our grassroots operation, grassroots software. More than 1,000 members signed up who communicate with their legislators, either phone calls, email, letters, to tell lawmakers what they think. If it's ABA or other entity policy, the president, executive director, the relevant entity leader, then move forward on that and file the recommendation. So once adopted, the public policy positions are cataloged in a document called the Public Policy Manual. So positions, once they're our positions, remain our positions until they're no longer our positions. We don't have to re-adopt everything. We think we probably got it right the first time, and if we didn't, we can always change it. But rather than having to go back and re-adopt all the policy is laid out in that public policy document. We review that annually with the House of Delegates and the Board of Governors, and as I say, it remains our policy as long as it's our policy. So I am through.